I just want to say I'm really honored to be here to get a chance to talk with all of y'all. This, I'm sure you all know, you're here, is an incredibly important day. It's the 11th annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, and it's a somber day, but it's a day that we all come together, and it doesn't happen that often. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a national community organizer. I do provide a lot of support for trans individuals in that trying to expand the resources that we have to reflect the diverse lives of people who whose genders do not necessarily align with what society expects them to. It's one thing that I'm really dedicated to and continue to provide my support. But what I want to talk with you a little bit about tonight is kind of more of a personal aspect of kind of how I came to be here. And kind of, you know, my thoughts on this particular day. I first think that it's important to recognize that we are at the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. In 1969, when police raided a gay bar in Chelsea, on Christopher Street, they did not expect to get a backlash. They did not expect people who they termed fairies and queers to stand up for themselves and to fight. It's quite often forgotten that trans people were at the forefront of a lot of that violence, and a lot of that rebellion, and a lot of that backlash. They stood up, we stood up for our rights, and it's something that doesn't necessarily happen so consistently, but it's something that needs to be remembered. I grew up not necessarily knowing about that story and not knowing that there were options for standing up for myself. In fact, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, kind of far away from here, smack dab in the middle of the country, and I didn't know anybody who reflected any sort of experience that I was having about myself. Like most young people, I was questioning who I was and questioning kind of where I was going about my life and how to put myself together. Like I'm sure many of us here, I didn't find answers in the TV channels that I was watching, in the stories that I was reading, in my classes, from my teachers, from my parents, from my community. I didn't see anything that could help me answer those questions. What I did see was a story of a young person that lived only minutes from where I grew up, who was raped and murdered because he was trans. When I heard about Brandon Teena, it was only in the context of his death. It was only in the context of Nebraska papers, which are not necessarily the most kind papers, in regards to trans folk. It was a really strong warning for me of how I was supposed to live my life, of what I should know about myself and what was or was not an option. Being trans was not an option when you know that the consequence is death. I didn't come out until much later in life and did so in Omaha, Nebraska. It took a lot. I went to the one trans organization that we had, called the River City Gender Alliance, most of whom were trans women who lived only part-time, who kept their participation in that group a secret to protect themselves. And when I finally summoned the courage to ask somebody if I could actually attend one of their meetings, I was laughed at, because at the time, the only thing they knew were that trans women were trans and that there was no other option. When I moved to New York City, I expected to fall into a community of accepting trans folk. I hoped to kind of just be able to be embraced by a web of folk that were kind of reflective of this Stonewall community, of this community of people who stood together and fought together. And unfortunately, that didn't happen, because what I found out is that the acronym LGBT is actually 4 different letters that are so unbelievably separate in so many ways. As much work as I've done in the LGBT community, I was so shocked and saddened at how easily it was for organizations who hold our hands in an acronym to cast trans people aside for political expediency. It was something that what I continue to do is work to try to find community in spaces like this that allow community to happen. Community isn't just a name or an acronym. Community is a group of people who share a network, who connect with each other based on a shared aspect or trait. And that's what we have with this big trans umbrella. For people who are assigned a gender at birth but feel that's an incomplete or incorrect description of their gender. And yet, even though we say that we're transgender or gender nonconforming, There's a lot of difference in this room. I mean, just look around. I mean, really, look around. Look around. There is so much diversity in this community, and quite often it's not reflected in our own intimate circles. We separate based on if you transitioned, haven't transitioned, if you're transmasculine, transfeminine, MTF, if you're on hormones, not on hormones, when you came out, how old you are, what color your skin is, where you grew up, and we don't necessarily get together except for times like these. This is a somber day. This is a somber day. Over 100 people across the world have lost their lives due to transphobia. And even though it's a somber day, I see beauty in this room tonight because it shows that there's a group of people who are willing to come together and say that there is hope. To say that there's something that can happen that is different than that. Saying that this isn't something that should happen. We shouldn't just accept it, read it in the papers, and go on with our lives. As gender roles and gender expectations continue to soften, our ability to be anonymous in the world increases. Some of us are able to hide. Some of us are able to disappear. And I caution against that because it's that anonymity that seems so enticing that is a comfort that we can't rely on. It's a comfort that allows for other people to be increasingly targeted and to allow the intersections of other ways that they're going to be oppressed, whether it be on class, whether it be race, whether it be age, whether it be ability, to impact their lives even more so. And as we continue to go off into our lives and to experience some of these comforts, when we don't connect on the basis of being trans or gender nonconforming, we allow for other people to be less safe. We need to come together. We need to do it more often. And we need, as Chris just said, we need to make connections. And this is the perfect time to do this. I encourage each and every one of you to turn around tonight and introduce yourself to somebody that you do not know. Share your phone number, share your name. You don't have to be their best friends. It's okay. You just got to have their number, because if something happens to you, you need somebody to call. And if something happens to them, they need somebody to call. And we can't keep relying on institutions that are based in systems of oppression. We can't keep relying on the medical community. We can't keep relying on organizations that are willing to dismiss us. We can't keep relying on these individuals to provide us with the safety that we can provide ourselves. We have a lot of power in this room. The community extends well beyond this room, and I encourage you all to start finding it. Because what we have today is a possibility, and we need to take it.